evening. I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Wednesday, June 11th. U.S. President Donald Trump has been given a temporary victory on his sweeping global tariffs after a federal appeals court extended an emergency stay on a lower court decision finding his duties unlawful. The Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit decision essentially freezes the U.S. Court of International Trade's decision last month, which claimed Mr. Trump doesn't have the authority to wield tariffs under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, meaning that countries will continue to be hit by duties. Donald Trump says the U.S. will get magnets and rare earth minerals from China under a new trade deal, and tariffs on Chinese goods will go to 55%. In return, the U.S. will allow Chinese students to attend American colleges and universities. Meanwhile, an international rights group says several global brands are among dozens of companies at risk of using forced labor through their Chinese supply chains. The report released today by Global Rights Compliance says the companies might be linked because they use critical minerals from China's Far West region. A man accused of plotting a shooting at a Jewish center in New York has been extradited to the U.S. from Canada. Mohammed Shazib Khan was arrested in Quebec last September, where RCMP say that he was in the process of planning a deadly attack targeting Jewish people in the U.S. The 20-year-old Pakistani citizen is set to appear in a New York court tomorrow on charges of attempting to provide material support to a foreign terrorist organization and attempting to commit terrorism that transcends national boundaries. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand announced yesterday that Canada is joining other countries in sanctioning 2 Israeli cabinet ministers for inciting violence against Palestinians in the West Bank.
With the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and Norway to announce further measures targeting extremist settler violence in the West Bank. Extremist settler violence is a threat to the safety and security of Israelis and Palestinians. It prolongs the existing conflict and it erodes the path to a two-state solution, which we see as the only path to sustainable peace and security, including for Israel. As the Prime Minister said on May 19th in the joint statement, if the ongoing expansion of settlements in the West Bank did not stop, concrete actions would be taken. That is why, together with 4 international counterparts, Australia, New Zealand, Norway, and the United Kingdom, Canada is implementing new sanctions under the Special Economic Measures Act addressing extremist settler violence. These measures are directed against individuals who directly contribute to extremist settler violence. The measures are not directed against the State of Israel itself. Canada remains unwavering in its support to the State of Israel. Canada remains steadfast in its support for a two-state solution so that both Israelis and Palestinians can live in peace and security. Canada will continue to call for the immediate release of all hostages, a ceasefire, Hamas laying down its weapons, and the free flow of urgently needed humanitarian supplies in Gaza.
Israel's national security minister and finance minister face asset freezes and travel bans. They are accused of supporting extremist rhetoric in advocating for the displacement of Palestinians in the West Bank and the expansion of Israeli settlements in the territory. And U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says sanctions laid against Israel by Canada and 4 other countries do not advance America's efforts to achieve a ceasefire in the Middle East. Mr. Rubio condemned Canada, the UK, Norway, Australia, and New Zealand for sanctioning Israel's national security minister and finance minister. And released on Tuesday, the new Angus Reid survey suggests that 2/3 of Canadians support Prime Minister Mark Carney's announcement Monday to boost Canada's defense spending to 2% of our GDP, a minimum requirement under NATO that Canada has never achieved since the alliance introduced the benchmark in 2006. We spoke with the Toronto Sun's Brian Passafoom on Tuesday for more on the poll.
Yeah, so a new Angus Reid survey that was out today, today being Tuesday. It seems that everybody's on board with this. Yesterday, a lot of people were surprised to see that Pierre Poilievre was in favor of it. Of course, he says he also wants to have a budget to see where this money is coming from. But yeah, it's Yeah, two-thirds of Canadians are supporting this move. And what this move does is it increases Canada's defense spending to right now it's about 1.37% of our GDP. And what Carney wants to do is increase it to 2% of GDP, which is the minimum benchmark for NATO members. It's the minimum amount of spending that NATO asks of its members. Not a lot of countries do it. Canada has always been, for at least the past few years, been one of the worst offenders. Like for example, you got Poland and the U.S. They're the two, the two biggest spenders when it comes to NATO countries. So, yeah, two-thirds of Canadians are in support of this, which I think should come as no surprise. There's been a lot of criticism with the Canadian government relies on the U.S. to protect itself. It seems that previous governments, including former PM Trudeau, relied upon that, just seeing kind of the level of disrepair and obsolescence that our Canadian military is at right now. So, yeah, I think a lot of people are see this as kind of a breath of fresh air and a sign that Carney may be something different than his predecessor.
We also asked if we know where the money will be spent.
There really isn't a whole lot of details right now. Story I'm working on for tomorrow's paper. I spoke to some analysts and pundits about it, and that's the big question. The big question is, government spending has been a big issue lately. You've got a public service as big as it's ever been. A lot of spending promises made. The main estimates were released, quietly released late last month when the King was in town, and they laid out a $480 billion spending package that didn't include a lot of the promises that Carney had made during the campaign. So the devil's in the details. Right now, people are wondering where this money is coming from. It's one thing to say, yeah, let's increase our spending. But, keep in mind, we've got a country that can't procure itself. We have a paper bag. Just look at any of the boondoggles going on right now with the F-35 program, with icebreakers, with getting ships built. Even just procuring new submarines is something that Canada has a real hot problem with. So I think that moving forward right now, it's going to be sort of an exercise on getting it done and making sure that that Canada and Carney can put the money where their mouth is.
And this morning, the NDP spoke to the press, saying that they are very concerned about the Liberals' defense spending plan. They also called on Ottawa to better integrate Indigenous peoples in Canada's Arctic.
Since the 1950s, Arctic sovereignty policies will not be repeated. Inuit were relocated to places like Grise Fiord, Resolute, and all other communities that I represent. Inuit were made to be human flagpoles in the name of Canada. Inuit were lied to in the name of Arctic sovereignty. Liberals repeatedly make major announcements in impacting the Arctic, with a lack of consultation and cooperation with Arctic and Indigenous communities. Decisions about Canada's Arctic need to be made through cooperation, meaningful consultation, and consent. I am pleased with the announcement regarding the Junior Rangers program, as it will have a positive impact on young people in the Arctic communities, but it is not enough. Carney's defense plan, announced on Monday, relies heavily on the Arctic without investing in the people of the Arctic. Protecting Canada's Arctic means first and foremost investing in Inuit and Arctic territorial communities. Inuit expertise is being ignored, who have traditional knowledge of the Arctic since time immemorial.
NDP defense critic Heather McPherson added that the plan needs to better align with Canada's human rights priorities.
We need to see greater investments in people, in services, not just in the hardware. There has been decades-long abandonment of protecting the men and women in uniform that we have long called for more action by this government. We know that Canada's production and procurement must align with Canada's human rights obligations. Right now, Canada's arms export system is broken, and we must fix it to stop fueling the insecurity in human rights in Canada and around the world. Right now, we see the Canadian government not adhering to our arms trade treaty, selling weapons to places like Saudi Arabia, like India, like Israel, who are using them illegally against innocent civilians. We're also concerned that this particular process, this announcement, has missed key areas. We need to be looking at conflict prevention, at peacekeeping, at arms control, and at disarmament. These are areas that Canadians have expected this government to take a leadership role on, and we are so deeply diminished as a country in these areas.
Coming up after the break, Canada's first ever AI commissioner announces his plan to put more emphasis on harnessing the technology's economic benefits. After that, Prime Minister Mark Carney was joined by members of Parliament on Tuesday to raise the Pride flag in Ottawa. After that, we'll be joined by our correspondent Adam Zivo, who reported from the Pride celebrations in Jerusalem. We'll have these stories and more news coming up right after the break. Canada's new Minister of Artificial Intelligence says he'll put less emphasis on regulation and more on harnessing the economic benefits. Evan Solomon used his first speech since becoming Canada's first ever AI minister to lay out his priorities.
Essentially, we are at a Gutenberg-like moment, and we've got to recognize that. And it's just the beginning. If you mix those two dynamics of the political disruption and the technological disruption, and then you add some catalytic ingredients like disinformation, distrust, diseases like COVID, you get the twin stars of history blinking furiously, crisis and opportunity, crisis and opportunity. And you oscillate between the despair of the crisis and the awesome power of the opportunity we've got. And we've got to strike that balance. This is exactly why the Prime Minister created this new Ministry of AI and Digital Innovation, because he recognized it's not just a technological shift. Hey, adopt a little AI, find, things will get 20% more productive, and things are pretty good. That's not what is going to happen. We are creating the economy of the future that will have disruptive force play throughout our society, and we need to get it right.
Prime Minister Mark Carney was joined by members of Parliament from all parties on Tuesday afternoon as he raised the Pride flag in Ottawa. In his remarks on Parliament Hill, Mr. Carney said Pride is both a celebration of how love has already won, as well as a promise to ensure that everyone's rights are protected.
Our country, like the flag, is a mosaic. We're all different. We all have our distinctions. We're all Canadian. And one of our strengths of Canada is recognizing that people can be who they want to be, they can love whom they want to love, they can live where they want to live. The federal government, on whose seat we are the defender of those rights. We are the defender of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And as we gather today in a moment to raise a flag in recognition of those rights, it's more than 40 years since the Charter was first signed right here on Parliament Hill. We should recognize the progress that has been made that is both powerful but also sometimes precarious. 22 years ago, on this very day, June 10th, 2003, the Ontario Court of Appeal issued a decision that immediately legalized equal marriage for same-sex couples in Ontario, a first for any province. I remember that feeling on that day. And 20 years ago this month, the Parliament of Canada passed the Civil Marriage Act, making Canada one of the first countries in the world to recognize and make marriage equality the law of the land.
And in Israel, our correspondent Adam Zivo was in Jerusalem reporting from the Pride celebrations there.
Thousands of Israelis gathered in Jerusalem last week to celebrate the city's annual Pride Parade. While the LGBTQ community is widely accepted within Israel, Jerusalem remains a highly traditional city where gender and sexual minorities are not always safe. As such, major streets and intersections were cordoned off by the police, and the parade's atmosphere was more that of a protest than a party. No alcohol was sold, and in lieu of shirtless men, most attendees were youth and families. This stands in stark contrast to Tel Aviv, which, despite being located just an hour away, has a far more progressive culture where LGBTQ acceptance is ubiquitous. This was the first Pride festival in Jerusalem since Hamas's October 7th attack, and its resumption raised questions about how protests ought to be handled during wartime. For example, is it appropriate to show joy when fellow citizens remain in captivity in Gaza? Additionally, this year's festival marked the 10-year anniversary of the murder of 16-year-old Shira Banki, who was stabbed by an ultra-Orthodox man while marching in Jerusalem Pride in 2015. Let's hear what some of this year's attendees had to say about the event.
If you want to ask me 2 years ago, then we would probably talk about the difference between the Tel Aviv Pride and all of the other prides in Israel. In Tel Aviv, it's a beautiful big party, but it's a party. And then in Jerusalem, and now in recent years in Beersheba, in Haifa, it's much more of a demonstration. It's a way of saying, you know, we belong in this city as well. In places in Israel that are not Tel Aviv, holding a pride is saying, you know, not everyone who's LGBTQ who lives in Israel has to live in Tel Aviv. It's other places, other cities, other rural areas can be ours as well. Right to the side of where we're speaking right now, there's a circle of people talking about hostages and hostage families, and where does that fit into pride? If you go a bit in that direction, you'll see people demonstrating for children in Gaza and for their right to be safe. And generally the kinds of demonstrations that we've had in the last year and a half were very sad and traumatic ones. Trying to have a happy demonstration, trying to have a happy life here is a big political question right now. Is it ethical to try to fight for things that are not ending this war and to just try to be happy and to dance and to dress in colorful clothing and to do nice things with your kids? Or should it only be about trying to stop the war?
My name is Michal Neumann. I'm the family of Shira Banki. 10 years ago, we lost Shira in this parade. Shira came here, she was a high school pupil. She came here with her friends to demonstrate support in the different communities as part of this democratic country. And unfortunately, she was murdered during the parade. I'm saying that unfortunately in the last few years we've seen that the different groups in the Israeli society are not very much tolerant to each other. You know, we just have to hope that people will wake up and see that we have to have each other, let everyone live the way they choose to live. It's a free country, it's supposed to be a free country. You don't have to live like the others, but you cannot enforce others to live the way you want to live. And they should be their citizens just like everyone, and they have to have full rights as the citizens of the State of Israel.
The international crowd should know it's very different than in, you know, say Canada or Europe, because it's dangerous here. Take a walk in Tel Aviv, you're gonna see a pride flag in every street, in every corner. It's like the Pride Parade there is more of a celebration, if you ask me. Like, there's no counter protests there. No one's been murdered in Tel Aviv. Here, it's political, it's charged, it's dangerous. That voice, this presence, is way less. How do you say it? Like, it can't be taken for granted.
It's unsafe here for LGBTQ people to walk down the streets to express their love publicly, but we are fighting, and I'm sure that it will get better. We are going to win this. It's been growing bigger and bigger every year. People are here from all around Israel. It became really a symbol of our struggle, and I'm amazed by how big it's getting.
While Israel has developed into an accepting society where LGBT people are generally treated with respect, cultural differences nonetheless persist between cities. While it is easy to be gay in Tel Aviv, life in Jerusalem can be more challenging. I'm Adam Zivo, reporting from Israel for the News Forum.
A new poll suggests almost half of Canadians believe Israel is committing genocide in the Gaza Strip. Leger surveyed just over 1,500 Canadians last week about their thoughts on the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. When asked if they believe Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza, 49% said yes, while 26% said they disagree, and 36% said they don't know. Last night, LA's mayor announced a curfew in response to ongoing riots in the city.
I wanted to let the city know that I have declared a local emergency and issued a curfew for downtown Los Angeles to stop the vandalism, to stop the looting. Many businesses have now been affected by or vandalized. Last night, there were 23 businesses that were looted, and I think that if you drive through downtown LA, the graffiti is everywhere and has caused significant damages to businesses and a number of properties. So my message to you is, if you do not live or work in downtown LA, avoid the area. Law enforcement will arrest individuals who break the curfew, and you will be prosecuted. Hundreds of officers from police and sheriff departments from across the region and state are working alongside LAPD through a unified command structure. The curfew will be in place tonight from 8 p.m. until 6 a.m.
Los Angeles police made arrests moments after the curfew was announced. Officers on horseback used crowd control projectiles to break up a group of hundreds demonstrating against Donald Trump's immigration crackdown. Hours after the curfew went into effect, many protesters had dispersed, although minor sporadic confrontations continued. Coming up after the break, we'll be joined by Raheem Mohammed from the National Post to unpack the latest tensions between Danielle Smith and Stephen Guilbeault. We'll be right back after these messages. Stephen Guilbeault may no longer be federal environment minister, but Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says she still sees him as a threat to the province's oil and gas industry, specifically over decisions on national parks. Earlier, we spoke with the National Post's Raheem Mohammed about the latest tensions and what exactly Ms. Smith is accusing Mr. Guilbeault of.
Well, she hasn't put forward any accusations as of yet. The premier, as your audience may know, she has a weekly radio show called Your Province, Your Premier. In the most recent episode that was broadcast over the weekend, she said she didn't trust Stephen Guilbeault. So Stephen Guilbeault, as you may know, he was environment minister under Justin Trudeau for several years. He was recently shuffled out of environment under Prime Minister Carney, but he kept his role as minister responsible for Parks Canada, which puts him in a bit of a weird situation right now. So he's minister of Canadian Heritage and National Identity, and also minister responsible for Parks Canada. You would see how Parks Canada logically links up with the Environment Ministry. I think there's less of a clear connection to Canadian identity or heritage, more of a tangential one. So Smith has basically said, she does not trust Minister Guilbeault in this role, continuing to have authority over the creation of new national parks. One, because of some concerns about his management of the Jasper wildfires in the summer of 2024, and the preparations or steps he did or didn't take in advance to clear out some highly flammable dead trees in the area where we had the wildfires. And two, and I think more immediately, he's quite consistently had an anti-oil and gas track record of being sort of aggressively anti-oil and gas. At one point, he trespassed on the Premier of Alberta, Ralph Klein's personal home to install solar panels on the roof as a prank. The Premier's wife happened to be home at the time, and she was terrified, but it was a funny prank on Guilbeault's side. So Smith is basically saying, hey, if this isn't the individual responsible for federal parks, I don't trust him to carry out his mandate or exercise his authority in a way that's not going to sabotage Alberta pipelines or other energy infrastructure. So she's basically saying that from now on, given the current circumstances, given Guilbeault being where he is right now, that she does not want to see another inch of federal parkland being created in Alberta. She said that if Alberta kind of on its own decides that there's critical habitat it needs to protect, it will create a provincial park under provincial laws. So that's where she stands right now in terms of Minister Guilbeault.
We also discussed where exactly these national parks would go and why there's a push to create new ones.
The Liberal government campaigned on a promise to create 10 new national parks, as well as 15 urban parks. And urban parks is where there's been some tension between Smith's UCP government in Alberta and the former Environment Minister, Stephen Guilbeault. So during his time as Justin Trudeau's Environment Minister, Mr. Guilbeault was involved when Parks Canada negotiated directly with the city of Edmonton about creating a national park or adding national protection to Edmonton's river valleys. So the provincial government was initially cut out of these conversations. It was a bilateral conversation between Edmonton and Ottawa. That led the UCP to put forward a bill where provincial governments would need to be consulted on the creation of these sorts of urban parks around larger municipalities like Edmonton. So there's a bit of distrust on the part of the Smith government and the individual who put forward the private member's bill. Was an Edmonton area MP by the name of Brandon Lumley. So there's a bit of mistrust already in the relationship with the Parks Canada and the Alberta government over how all that went down. And there's a sense that the premier doesn't trust Guilbeault, who's held on to Parks Canada, despite now being in a portfolio that really has nothing to do with parks and heritage. She's saying she doesn't trust Guilbeault to exercise these powers he still has to create new national parks responsibly.
Lastly, Rahim unpacked how the creation of new parks would limit infrastructure projects like oil and gas, and if it's possible for the two to coexist.
Well, there can and have been pipelines that have been run through national parks. So, for instance, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, a major pipeline to the west coast, runs through Jasper National Park. But as you designate more national parkland toward transit sites, so there's a proposal about 50 kilometers away from the Port of Churchill in Manitoba right now. It makes the process of consultation and it makes the regulatory process and the process of approval a lot more complicated when you have to kind of work in the federal angle, the Parks Canada angle, and the impact on various ecosystems. So it's not necessarily a killer of these sorts of projects, but it does make the process to getting things like pipelines approved more challenging and more torturous.
The Canadian Taxpayers Federation released its finance minister report card, ranking provincial finance ministers on spending, debt, and tax relief. Alberta Finance Minister Nate Horner received an overall grade of B. Chris Sims from the CTF walked through why Alberta ended up with the second highest score.
Yeah, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation put together this report giving letter grades to provincial finance ministers based on the current budget. And we did that for a couple of reasons. One, it can be easy to get distracted by what's going on in Ottawa and just fight Ottawa. And second, it's really important to keep an eye on what's happening here at home. So here in Alberta, we should be a financial fortress. We need to have a balanced budget. We need to start paying down the debt, meaning the debt goes down and not up. And we need to shrink the size of government. So all in all, combined with lower taxes, that is what has earned Finance Minister Nate Horner a B.
Ms. Sims also explained how Alberta ranked compared to other provinces in Canada.
Compared to other finance ministers, Horner is doing very well. And one of the main things we're super happy about here at the Taxpayers Federation is, of course, the big income tax cut. The UCP government kept its election promise in reducing the lowest income tax bracket provincially from 10% down to 8% for the first $60,000 worth of earnings. What that means for normal people is that on average, a two-person working family is going to be saving around $1,500 this year in this income tax cut. So that was a really big deal. We were happy to see that.
News coming out of Alberta, with a focus on the growing issue of deficits in the province.
Yeah, of course, there is some bad news, and that is we're in the red. We are borrowing more money. We are heaping more than $5 billion new dollars onto our debt provincially here in Alberta. That's not okay. We need to be paying down the debt, not making the debt go up. Yeah, the debt is important because, of course, we're spending money on interest payments on the debt. Just like someone's line of credit or a credit card, you have to pay interest on that. And here in Alberta, we're paying nearly $3 billion this year on that debt interest charge. That's about $8 million per day. We're spending more money on our debt interest charges than we are on emergency services, than we are on that ministry. For the amount that we're spending on debt interest charges, we could pay the salaries of 14,000 police officers plus 14,000 paramedics. So yeah, this is why we have got to get that debt under control and get spending down.
A new report by Canada's Auditor General says the federal government has been slow to reduce its office space. Auditor General Karen Hogan says the government's plan for office space depends on larger departments agreeing to reduce their footprints, but some are reluctant to do so.
Our next audit looked at the federal government's efforts to right-size its portfolio of office space to minimize costs and to free up underused properties that could be converted into affordable housing. In 2017, Public Services and Procurement Canada estimated that half of the government's office space was underused. The department planned to reduce office space by 50% by 2034. Our audit found that Public Services and Procurement Canada had made little progress in its multi-year effort to reduce its office space portfolio. The department estimates the reduction in federal office space will generate savings of about $3.9 billion over the next 10 years. However, efforts to right-size federal office space achieved less than a 2% reduction from 2019 to 2024, mainly because of a lack of funding.
Coming up after the break, Saskatchewan's ombudsman slams the delays in aid being delivered to wildfire evacuees. Forum Daily will be right back after these messages. Saskatchewan's ombudsman says that wildfire evacuees are having to sleep in their cars as aid is delayed. Sharon Pratchler says that evacuees calling in for help are being told that the government will get back to them in 4 days. The ombudsman says that her staff are overwhelmed trying to help evacuees find supports. Opposition NDP member Jordan McPhail says that Ms. Pratchler's concerns echo what he is hearing from the front lines. Canada's Chief Justice is raising the alarm about growing threats to democracy around the world. Richard Wagner says that the rule of law and judicial independence are under attack in many countries. He warns that when governments start discrediting the media, judges, lawyers, and even universities, it could be a warning sign of rising dictatorship.
People who met with us asked similar questions and shared concerns. They wanted to learn more on our independence as judges, on our training, on the way we are named or chosen, and on the ethical principles that we must follow. To say things simply, Canadians want to be reassured regarding the constitutional democracy in Canada and how solid it is. And that's not surprising. Throughout the world, autocratic regimes are attacking the media, judicial powers, and national institutions. Canadians are seeing this regression in democracy and are wondering if that could happen here.
I'd like to reassure them. For 150 years, the Supreme Court of Canada has interpreted our Constitution and shaped Canada's legal landscape. Since 1982, it has guaranteed people's rights and freedoms according to the Charter. And to this day, the Court ensures that the rule of law is not just a legal principle, but the bedrock of our democratic society.
Mr. Wagner also shared some positive news. A new $1 coin will be released to mark the 150th anniversary of the Supreme Court of Canada. At a news conference in Ottawa on Tuesday, a group of MPs and senators called on Canada's delegation to the upcoming G7 meeting in Alberta to champion the release of Jimmy Lai, a jailed newspaper publisher and a pro-democracy activist in Hong Kong.
Jimmy Lai's case and cause has to be seen as representing each and every one of us. Jimmy Lai represents us all, and that's why we are united here in calling for his urgent release, in calling for the conferring of Canadian citizenship on him, and on the eve of the G7 summit to mobilize the international community in the shared defense of his rights, freedom, rule of law, which is the rights and freedoms of all of us.
Today marks 1,622 days of unlawful imprisonment for Jimmy Lai. He's been in solitary confinement throughout that time. He's 77, turning 78 this year, and he's diabetic. And make no mistake, at this press conference today is of vital importance, not just to secure Jimmy Lai's liberty, but also to save his life. Because what he faces is a life sentence, or in reality, a death sentence, simply for speaking truth to power. And what we've seen play out since December 2023 in the courtroom in Hong Kong is a case which essentially involves an allegation of conspiracy to commit journalism and conspiracy to raise human rights and pro-democracy values and to press for values which Canada holds so dear.
One of the worries we had going in the trial was that in their attempts to break him, we were worried that they had managed to do that. You know, like what does... I can't imagine what someone has to go through to spend more than 1,600 days by himself in a cell with light blocked off. And on the stand, he has shown that they haven't broken him, that the freedoms that he stood for aren't freedoms that they could buy or make him bow down and give up on. And so it's just is this tremendous story of this man who has stood for everything that we believe and everything that we know is right, and he is still fighting. And I think he would be so tremendously grateful and happy to know that there is all these wonderful people that are still fighting.
An official engagement group to the G7 representing feminist civil society from around the world, known as Women's 7, hosted a press conference in Ottawa on Tuesday. They outlined their demands ahead of the upcoming summit taking place in Alberta next week.
This is a challenging moment. Democracy, human rights, and civic space are under attack. The shrinking space for civil society poses urgent threats to feminist movements worldwide. Against this backdrop, progress on women's rights and gender equality has stalled. In the face of this, we call on G7 leaders to advance gender justice.
Our primary call to the G7 leaders is to safeguard democracy and democratic principles. As the host, Canada can set the agenda and facilitate a discussion that builds on past G7 statements in support of gender equality. Second, we call on G7 leaders to take meaningful action to address both the climate crisis and the increasing militarization of our world. As people and the planet, we are facing existential threats that require investment in positive directions. Canada can leverage its influence to push for meaningful action.
Our third call to action is for G7 leaders to take coherent action across both foreign and domestic policies to ensure consistent action on gender justice and universal human rights on all issues. Canada can provide leadership in using a gendered lens in all G7 discussions, economic measures, peace and security, emerging technologies, and more. We call on the G7 leaders to back their words with coherent policies, concrete actions, and resources. That means investing in care infrastructure, funding feminist movements, respecting international law, and ensuring accountability for all human rights violations, including those enabled or ignored by G7 states.
The food delivery app DoorDash is being sued by Canada's competition watchdog for marketing its online delivery service at a lower price than the actual cost for consumers. The Competition Bureau says mandatory fees at checkout, including one for making purchases in BC, resulted in customers not being able to pay the advertised amount on websites or mobile apps. Other alleged charges include fees for delivering food a further distance and placing smaller orders. DoorDash says it does not hide fees from consumers or mislead them. Dr. Sylvain Charabois from the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University joined us for more on the suit.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting case because for Canada's watchdog, competition watchdog, it is the first time in many years we've seen the Bureau sue a company. It's the first time since the chocolate affair, which is still ongoing, by the way. We've seen Hershey and other companies paying fines, millions of dollars. So it's been interesting to watch. Now in DoorDash case, it's really about misleading promotions. Whether or not it's factually accurate, we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I think for many years now, we've heard rumors that perhaps some promotions are false that are offered by apps like DoorDash. So it is going to be an interesting case, and I think it sends a strong signal to the marketplace that there is a price to pay for convenience, but you cannot exaggerate. Well, actually, since last year, Parliament did adopt a law allowing the Bureau to investigate and go further and actually grab some data, go after some data to actually prosecute, which is exactly what it's doing now. So it has way more power than it has before, and it's using that power. So I think it's a step in the right direction. We just need a more forceful bureau to take action and making sure that people can trust these apps. And of course, there are other layers within the food industry that would require some attention as well. Every now and then, inflation becomes a problem for consumers, and that's when rumors start going on everywhere as a result of higher prices. So I think it's important for the bureau to keep an eye on some of these things, and if there are doubts, you can actually go after some of these companies and go after some quantitative evidence.
Environment Canada predicts that Canada is in for a warmer summer than normal. Warning preparedness meteorologist Jennifer Smith says that the warmth could come from short-term heat waves or a more persistent heat that lingers for months. The federal agency says Atlantic Canada, Quebec, Ontario, and northern Manitoba are especially likely to see a hot summer. Environment Canada has lifted special weather statements about a record-breaking hot spell for much of British Columbia. However, the agency says the early season heat event will persist in the southwestern interior and western Kootenay regions, with temperatures in the low to mid 30s. Atlantic City Police say they've recovered a stolen custom-built electric guitar that belongs to the band Heart. Police said they retrieved the Telecaster guitar from a woman who bought it from the theft suspect. A vintage 1966 Gibson EM50 mandolin remains unaccounted for. The instruments were stolen while the band's gear was set up at a venue where Heart was set to kick off their tour the next day. I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, you can always visit our website at forumdailynews.ca and make sure to follow us on our social media handles on X and TikTok. Good night, Canada.